Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Keto Geek Podcast. My name is Fahad, and I am the host of this show. This episode, like every other episode, is sponsored by Keto Geek. It sounds really corny when I say that because we're kind of self-sponsoring ourselves, but it's cool because we can bring the most controversial guests on board that have nothing to do with our food products. Like, for example, carnivores that we've brought on our podcast. I mean, they don't even consume our products, but we like to bring them on board just to learn from everybody else and grow as a company. We want to do the right thing and create the best food products that we can from the best ingredients that we can find. Our hallmark product right now is the Energy Pod, which is basically a food emulsion created by using ingredients we have found from in the entire country. For example, the chocolate fudge energy pod that is on our website and is my personal favorite contains organic cocoa, which is locally sourced here from California. The ghee that goes in there, filled with good saturated fats, is made from pasture-raised and organic butter, locally sourced from a farm and creamery here in California. Actually, right next door is in Petaluma, California. And they treat their cows humanely, and the butterfat content on their butter is 85 to 87%, which is huge. And if you are a chef or a pastry chef, you know what I'm talking about. This is the real deal. Besides that, we also use MCT oil in there, which turns into ketones endogenously, causes beta oxidation, which is pretty awesome. And then we have also included vanilla beans in there, and this is the real deal. Guys and gals, most of the vanilla you buy in store contains tons of fillers, such as silicon dioxide, cornstarch, and alcohol. But we wanted to go for the real deal and give you guys the authentic aroma and taste of vanilla. So we added that to all our products. It's a tiny detail, but we're just not big fans of the mock vanilla and all the fillers that come with it. Besides that, we do use zero or very, very, very low glycemic sweeteners in our product, which do not have an impact on blood glucose or insulin, at least based on the studies that we have researched and several of the people who have tested our products using blood ketones have told us. So we think it is one of the best keto and low carb friendly product that we have created, and we will strive forward to benchmark in the world of food and nutrition with our goals, with our products, with our intentions, with our actions, and everything else. We want to end the chronic conditions in the world, such as diabetes, and maybe hopefully end cancer once and for all. That will be a dream come true. We shall see about that. Our product definitely is getting some killer accolades and reviews from the top influencers in the ketosphere. We will be featured in the Keto Crate box in May, and then we have been approached by several other companies like the Onnit's Keto Box is also interested in us. So we'll see how that pans out. And speaking of all of this, we will be having a new flavor for our energy pods in May, most likely in the middle of May, probably about May 15th or so. And that will be a high-fat, high-protein chocolate, salted chocolate flavor. It's kind of like the coffee protein pod that some of you guys have tried that is on our website. But instead of coffee, it's going to have some really amazing chocolatier-grade cocoa in it. So watch out for that. It will be an awesome flavor. And I think that's about it as far as all the announcements are concerned. And I think we can now proceed to our killer podcast with Craig Emmerich. And so let me give you guys a little bit of a backstory or a bio on Craig. Well, Craig Emmerich graduated in electrical engineering and has always had a systems approach to his work. He followed his wife, Maria Emmerich, into the nutrition field and has since dedicated his time researching and looking at nutrition and biology from a systems perspective. Over the last 8 years, he has worked with hundreds of clients alongside Maria to help them heal bodies and lose weight, leveraging their biology to make it easy. You know what? We have way too many engineers in the low-carb and keto world. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring to you the podcast I had with Craig Emmerich. Craig, you are quite a bit of a rock star in the ketosphere, and it is a bit of an honor to have you on board on our Keto Geek podcast. So welcome aboard. Thank you so much. So
thank you.
Before we get into anything at all, how's life?
Life is busy. We got a lot of things going on. My wife is running around the country doing these book signings, and I'm here holding the fort down and keeping the business going. And same time, I'm homeschooling our sons, who are 7 and 8 years old. So that's always a interesting mix to it as well. But yeah, we're keeping busy.
So let's just go back to let's just hit a reboot. And my question would be, how did you get into this low carb keto world?
Yeah, it was a bit of a longer journey for me than it was for my wife. Maria started out, she went to school for health and human performance and really was interested in that topic. But, at the time she was doing, quote, everything right. She was, cutting her fat, eating lots of, healthy whole grains and working out like crazy, and it just wasn't working for her. And so, a lot of what she learned in college was also kind of that same food pyramid kind of mentality on nutrition. And so she decided there's got to be some better way. And she just started researching every paper, every book she could get her hands onto, and in the process, writing her own books. And so she started along this journey. I was still an engineer at the time. I have a degree in electrical engineering. So I've been doing electrical engineering work, and then later moved into what's called product management, where you kind of own a product from a technical as well as marketing standpoint. And she was barreling down this path, and along the way I saw her success. I saw her, how good her energy levels were throughout the day, and her moods, and everything was so good. And of course, being the husband, she never pushed it on me, but I just saw her success and started going into that realm myself. And I saw, weight loss. I saw, improved energy and mood. So she kind of drugged me along with her journey, and I got into keto that way probably, 7, 8 years ago, and just have stuck with it ever since.
Okay. So how long ago was this entire process, and did you guys face any sort of backlash from friends, family, peers, nutritionists?
Oh, definitely. We've been about 10, 12 years for Maria being keto. Me, like I said, probably 7 or 8. But, she actually at one point was asked to come back to her university and speak. And when she presented the slides that she was going to discuss, all science-based, all referenced, they politely uninvited her.
Ouch.
To speak, And so, yeah, that's from an academic standpoint. But then, definitely, personal, family, what is this crazy thing you guys are doing? And, all those kind of things. But we stuck with it because we knew how good we felt, and we knew how good it was working for our clients, and the successes we were seeing. And we just kept going with it, kept researching more. And that's one thing that I think makes us a little different than some of the other keto communities out there, or quote unquote keto experts. We're always learning, and we're always researching to understand how our bodies work, the latest science, and adapting what we do to that. We're not set in stone. We're not stuck to a single ideology in that standpoint.
So who were some of the few, did I interrupt you?
No, I was going to say, we just kind of go with what works.
Okay. So while you were on this journey, did you guys come across certain people in the keto sphere or the low carb sphere that really influenced you or you guys and how you thought and your knowledge base? And when or how did that happen?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, over the course of 10, 12 years, they kind of run the gamut of anybody in this space. Obviously in the beginning, it was a lot of Bullock and Finney's work, with the art and science of low carb performance, and then low carb living, other book, and a lot of their studies, looking at they were in the 70s doing, real ketogenic studies on ketogenic performance and ketogenic diets. And you look at thing is about studies that, as I'm sure the devil's always in the details. You got to look at who funded the study, what were their motivations, what were their methods, what were the confounding factors. All of these things, when you look at a study, you got to kind of have a critical eye to it. And Bullock and Finney were really doing the ketogenic studies. A lot of the ones that would talk about low carb or keto, they're getting 100 or 150 grams of carbs a day, and it's like, well, that's not keto. You're not going to see the performance, or they run the study for 2 weeks, and the people aren't even fully keto adapted yet. So Bullock and Finney definitely were kind of the initial people, but more recently, personally, there's a lot of groups right now on Facebook, have websites and blogs that are doing really important work, I think, that are opening up different spaces. I know you've had them on your show, like, Dave Feldman or Ivor Cummings or Marty Kendall, guys at Keto Gains, Lewis and Tyler, they're all doing some great stuff, and it's all science-based. And that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I enjoy this community. It feels like a very interesting, very skeptical, but evolving community. It feels like you're on the edge of discovering something new. And one of the fascinating things I like about this community is they're focused on a lot of them are focused on the biochemistry of it, not just vague stuff that has been taught through some of the books. And speaking of books, you also have a book which is just called Keto, The Complete Guide to Success. And how did you guys just keto?
Yeah, just thought that was the simplest, and that's the main overarching topic of what the book's about, is that kind of lifestyle. But we try to dig into some of these deeper scientific and biological aspects of how our body work, but then at the same time keeping it in an easy to understand format. I think that some of my engineering background with the product management spin. As a product manager, you got a very technical product that you have to understand fully, but then you have to disseminate how that works to a wide range of people, everybody from, PhD electrical engineers in the lab to salespeople or, management. You got to disseminate that information in an easy to understand way of how these things work. And I think I've taken that and put it in this book.
So how do you normally do your research, or what kind of resources you use and you think are reliable as far as incorporating some knowledge in your books is concerned?
Excuse me. Lots of areas, obviously scientific studies, I'm always looking at new studies coming out. I follow a lot of different scientists and people that are in these areas doing work. So, I know when there's new studies published, and again, with that critical eye on the study and what factors contribute and all that. But I also have, like, some of the groups I just mentioned on Facebook and blogs. I follow them, and other podcasts like yours, where I can constantly be hearing different angles and different positions, from leading people in this area, and just keep learning. And that's one of the things I always, as an engineer, in my background as well. As an electrical engineer, I learned early, if you're not keeping up with the latest science going on, 6 months, you're out of date. I mean, you got to keep up on things. And I think I've kind of kept that as I've moved into this health space.
Yes, and this brings me to an interesting question here. A lot of the time, people write a book, and knowing how fast the science can antiquate a book, how would you deal with just evolving further with this concept and knowledge? So have you wondered about this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. There are definitely nuances and things in this book that somewhat contradict one of Maria's, earlier books that she wrote 6, 8, 9 years ago. But, it's because we learned some of the things about biology and, different aspects of how the body works. So we adjusted our position on what we believe works best. And, we put that into this book. And, 5 years from now, I'm sure we could write another book that has another spin or another angle on this that's maybe got a deeper understanding. And, we'll continue to learn and implement that in books or with, on our blog or wherever we can to spread that knowledge.
When should a person write a book?
It's a process. It took us, 12 to 18 months, I'd say, to put everything together. It's a long process. It's a lot of work. I just felt like we knew enough additional information about this topic that it was time to put something else out there that kind of updated it and improved it, what we've done previously.
Okay. All right. So let's get into some of the questions that I had for you as far as technicalities of keto is concerned. But first of all, the fun question here is, what's the fastest way to die while being ketotic?
Well, you could not eat anything, right? I mean, you could fast and probably get you to death the quickest, in the long term. You'd be keto the whole time. I mean, I guess that would probably be the quickest.
Wouldn't that also be the quickest way to get into ketosis too?
Yeah. Technically, if you fast, I write in the book about there's kind of 3 stages of keto. If you lower your carbs below a certain level, you're going to start showing blood ketones that are elevated within the first usually 2 to 3 days. Fasting, you might be able to speed that up a little bit, maybe just 2 days or a day and a half. But that's when you start seeing elevated blood ketones. You may not feel that great. There's going to be an adaption period. Your body isn't instantaneously switching as primary fuels from glucose to fatty acids. You got to have a transition period. Part of that transition period is that first 4 to 6 weeks, your body's actually making more mitochondria. And this is why initially you can see a dip in performance, but then because fat doesn't burn as readily in mitochondria as glucose. Glucose is kind of like fire, the kerosene coming in, versus fat, it takes a little more effort. But the body then makes more mitochondria so that it can more efficiently burn fat. And yet that's why you see in a lot of these studies, performance equals out after that 4 to 6 week adaptation period.
What do you think happens to the previous mitochondria? Do they get better at fat burning or they just suck?
Well, they start burning fat. It's just fat takes a little more, a few more ATP cycles, a little bit more work to be used as fuel. And so that's why you get that little bit of a dip in performance. But then when you get more mitochondria around, you can utilize that additional mitochondria to get a percentage increase in performance, which equals you back out after that adaptation period to where you were as a glucose. Volek and Finney have shown, in their some of their studies that, initially performance dips from when they were a primarily glucose burner. And then after 4 to 6 weeks, it equals back out. Yeah. And then there's kind of a third phase to keto adaptation too. That's beyond that 4 to 6 week period, 6 months, a year. There's additional metabolic improvements that occur. And another Volek and Finney study showed this, that 1 year after turning to keto, athletes were still seeing some metabolic improvements from the initial adaptation period. So there's some things that go on beyond that too that can make this a good lifestyle.
Is there some sort of genetic or some sort of expression or signaling that's going on that tells the mitochondria, okay, time to create some new mitochondria that is good at burning fat?
Yeah, I don't know at the biological level what types of hormones or enzymes that might be creating those signals, but the studies have shown that there are more mitochondria being generated. And some of it has to do with, I know that I've seen some, I think it was Dr. Bickman that had presentation on brown fat and how when you're keto, you actually activate more brown fat, which is creating mitochondria in your adipocytes that generate heat, and kind of like an activated fat adipose, right? So there's additional mitochondria being generated there. So I think there's a lot of things going on there, but.
Okay. So one of the things that you talk about in your book is that sugar can accelerate aging. Is it just a one-step thing? It just grows a big beard and you start growing white hair, or is there a cascade of events, or what's up?
There's a whole cascade, events. There's so many components to that. Like, just look at nutrient density. Nutrient dense foods, micronutrients are so important for your body to keep healthy cells, to keep aging at bay. Well, what's sugar? It's completely an empty calorie. There's no micronutrients coming along with it. When you got lots of sugar and processed foods that typically come with, you're not feeding your cells, and the cells get aged. Your skin, the skin cells don't stay as healthy and elastic, and you get wrinkles and those type of aging effects. So there's a lot of things that come from just that angle of it. But there's also there's glycation and advanced glycation end products that can result from excessive glucose coming into the system. So there's those components as well. Like for instance, Alzheimer's is typically referred to as type 3 diabetes because it's kind of like insulin resistance of the brain. And that's why keto can help a lot, because you switch it to burn ketones for fuel.
Okay. So how do these nutrients, like for example, I ate an avocado, how would that help my mitochondria? Can we make some sense out of this? Or how does it, like I'm trying to think of how can we simplify this thing a little bit?
Well, I don't know about the mitochondria, all your cells, all your hormones and all your interactions of the body. I have a chart in the book of kind of the map of, you can look at it online as well, the map of all the biochemical reactions in the body that occur. And it's this massive, thing of feedback loops and cycles and all this stuff that's going on to keep you alive. And micronutrients play such a key role because they're precursors to, building hormones, building cells, healthy, feeding healthy cells. I think it's all of these components together that those, high nutrient dense foods can feed those processes and keep everything running healthy.
Okay. So one of the concepts you talk about is fat storage hierarchy. Would you like to just go on a tear on this, or do you want me to give you something?
No, this is a great topic. This is something that, there's kind of two camps in general, and especially I think in the keto world, that believe, one side believes kind of, insulin's the enemy, and insulin resistance occurs first, and that makes you fat or makes you obese. And then there's another angle, and there's science going back decades supporting this, that the insulin resistance starts in the adipose site. So your adipose site that's your fat storage site. It's like a cell that you can stuff fat into. The fat going in is a triglyceride molecule, and you can only stuff so many in any given fat cell. And so what happens to that fat cell when it gets overstuffed and inflamed? It says, hey, I'm stuffed. I don't want any more fat. So it starts rejecting glucose or rejecting insulin. So it becomes insulin resistant because it can't store any more fat. So it doesn't want the fat, so it's got to reject the insulin so that no more fat comes in. If you get too many of these fat cells on your body that are inflamed, you have insulin resistant, and fat starts to build up in the body, in other places like the liver and the pancreas. And that's the snowball of metabolic syndrome occurring. And this also explains why, we've had clients, women that just don't gain weight no matter what they eat. And yet they can have serious metabolic problems. We had a woman that, was 120 pounds and type 2 diabetic, and she was type 2 diabetic for so long that she actually burned out her beta cells and became type 1 as well. Because it didn't have most of us get a feedback loop, right? We get the feedback that we're getting overweight. But when you don't have a lot of adipocytes around, but the ones you do have are all stuffed and inflamed, you're insulin resistant, even if you are not, quote, obese or overweight. That's why you can have somebody who's 120 pounds and type 2 diabetic.
Yeah, so it would be a simplified way to put it that you become obese first and then you become insulin resistant. And for some people, they might be still skinny, but they've maxed out the amount of fat cells or the amount of fat they can store. Their capacity is done.
Exactly.
So what exactly is inflammation in your eyes?
Inflammation is, anything in the body that increases things like CRP or, your inflammation markers. Primarily, I'd say in the Western diet, you're talking about sugar, you're talking about omega-6, vegetable and seed oils, which easily get rancid and or oxidized and cause inflammation. I'd say those are probably the two primary causes.
Okay. All right. So is there a causation sort of effect with insulin and insulin resistance and inflammation?
Well, insulin by itself, if you are eating a lot of sugar and you're getting big spikes in insulin, and that can cause inflammation. Having chronically elevated insulin levels can cause inflammation in your arteries, cause lesions and those kind of things. But again, it's the effect of the elevated glucose coming in, eating too much sugar.
Okay.
Omega-6 fats, once you get oxidized, you get those free radicals, and those cause inflammation directly in the body. So like I said, I think those are two primary sources in the Western diet that are causing problems. Because they're so pervasive today. You can't find a prepackaged food that doesn't have a seed oil, soybean oil and sugar. I mean, everything's got it.
Do various different types of fats, like for example, omega-3s, omega-6s, have different impact on insulin? Is there some research on that? And just to make it even more complicated, what about different types of carbs and proteins?
Well, I think there's definitely variation. I would say at the base level, it's not a huge variation amongst the group. For example, fat, an omega-3 fat versus an omega-6, insulin response is going to be pretty much the same. There's the same basic function going on in the body of, I need to store this fat that's coming in if it's in excess of what's needed at the time. That's with any fuel. That kind of starts down the oxidative priority route. But, talking about fuels coming in and how they're stored and dealt with, insulin is kind of one of the controlling factors of that. But there's also an important point there is that some people think that fat doesn't raise insulin, but it does. You have to have insulin around to utilize or store that fat that's coming in.
Mm-hmm. Why does sugar raise insulin higher than everybody else?
I write a little bit about this in the book, how, at any given moment, you have a certain amount of fuel in your bloodstream. And it's kind of like a car, right? You don't want too much fuel hitting the engine or you're going to blow it up. So you want to tightly control the amount of fuel flowing around in the bloodstream. And it's not much. I mean, your glucose, 84 milligrams per deciliter in your entire blood volume equates to about 4 grams of glucose. That's not much, and then in your entire blood volume, the amount of calories in fat in your bloodstream in a typical, it can range fat can range quite a bit in the blood. Glucose has a tight range, right? You get above 200 and you start having problems, and that's only a twofold increase. Where fat, free fatty acids, triglycerides, you could have anywhere from 0.1 levels to 10 or 20 as far as calories. And that's, like 100x range. So I think that's part of the reason that insulin response is higher with carbohydrates, because it's got a tighter window that it's trying to keep it in. And so it becomes more of a death, a threat to survival if the glucose goes too high, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to tightly control that more than it's got to control the fatty acids in the bloodstream. You can have a wider range.
Yeah. This brings it to an interesting question. You don't have to, I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this. Why is there just 4 grams of glucose? Why can't we have more? I know it's like a childish question where, why can't I have the candy sort of thing? But do we know what's up with that?
Well, the body, you get all the effects that high blood sugar would give you, right? But from a biological standpoint, why does that happen? I think it leads back to the whole fuel thing I talked about earlier, that glucose is kind of a hot burning fuel, right? It's easy to oxidize and use as fuel. So you need less of it around at any given moment. Where fat, you can have more of it around because it's not quite as hot a burning fuel per se.
Yeah. Could it be that a lot of predatory animals in general have this sort of mechanism with reduced amount of blood glucose, and which it seems like help with a lot of glycolytic activities like high intensity? Maybe it's like for example, a tiger who has to spring to get to the prey, but after 5 minutes, or not even 5 minutes, 3 minutes, it's just dead. It's like you can't do like endurance sort of training. So is there some sort of relationship there? Ideas?
Possibly. Actually, I saw something on that is pretty interesting. It's our endurance is somewhat related to being bipedal, being able to walk on 2 legs. We're able to jog and breathe independently. If you look at animals like a cheetah, the force created at his speed when he lands his front feet forces his lungs to exhale. And then when he takes his back legs leap, he inhales. So he's tied to his pace with his breathing. And so that's why he runs out quicker, is because he cannot independently breathe from running. Humans, we can breathe multiple times per step if we want, if we need to. That was actually one of the things that tied their endurance to, versus humans.
Okay. Yeah, just thinking out loud just to see what kind of cues we have outside of the human body. But yeah, so let's go back to some of the other content. I can ask you a million questions, by the way. Your book is, by the way, really good. I was listening to it throughout my flight to and back from Hungary. And I think it's a very concise way to learn about the ketogenic diet without being trapped in some sort of a dogmatic position. So I really appreciate the write-up. I enjoyed that book.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the thermic effect of food, because that's a topic we've never really covered here. And I'm also curious, and if there's some things that I don't understand, I can pry you a little bit on that. So let's explain to people what it's all about.
Sure. So with any macronutrient that comes into your body, your body needs a certain amount of energy to process that macronutrient. What that means is, when something like carbohydrates come into your system, they are fairly easy to turn into fuel in the body. So it only takes about 8%. The thermic effect of food on carbohydrates is only about 8%. Which means if you ingest 100 calories of carbohydrate, you're going to get about 92 calories in the bloodstream or in your body at the end of the day when it goes through digestion and processing that macronutrient into something the body can use, right? Other things like fat's actually even lower. We have fat in our bodies, in our bloodstreams. Things like MCT oils can go straight into being used through the liver. Fat only has a 3% thermic effect of food. So 100 calories results in like 97 calories in the body. But this also gets interesting with respect to protein, especially when you start talking about people who have weight loss as a goal. Protein has a thermic effect of food of 25%. That means if you consume 100 calories worth of protein, only about 75 calories ends up in your body because it takes so much energy to break down those amino acids and use them in the body. It's a very energy intensive process. That's why things like protein sparing modified fast can be really powerful for weight loss. If you look at, I alluded to earlier, the oxidative priority. If you're not drinking alcohol, you're not taking exogenous ketones, if you keep your protein at a pretty moderate level, which is just dictated by your lean body mass, so just enough to preserve your muscle mass, and then you limit carbohydrates as much as possible, and then with protein sparing modified fast, you also dial down the fat, maybe around 40 grams of fat. You now are eliminating all these oxidative fuels from the body, so your body's got to tap into your fat stores to use them as fuel because there's not enough carbohydrates or fat coming in the diet. But you have enough protein to preserve the lean mass, build lean muscle, so you keep that body composition like you want it. And on top of it, about 25% of those protein calories end up getting negated through the thermic effect of food. So you get an additional advantage there. So protein sparing modified fast can be a really powerful tool for losing weight.
Yeah, I think Dr. Ted Naiman is all about it, and it seems to be growing a little bit in the trend as well in the low carb and the keto verse. So let's go ahead. I was going to say,
my wife 10 years ago, my wife was talking about what at the time she didn't know the science behind this, and so she termed the phrase pure protein day. So we would preach to our clients, try a pure protein day to help break your stall or to improve your weight loss results. Well, it was really just a protein sparing modified fast. We just didn't have the science to support it at the time, but which we now understand.
Okay. So let's sidetrack just a little bit for a second before we go into some of the questions. Let's talk about the protein sparing modified fast, so how do I decide how much protein I need and how little fat can I consume?
Yeah. So, protein is based on your lean mass. Typically, we have clients do 0.8 times their lean mass for their grams of protein a day. So let's say to make the math easy, 150 pounds, 33% body fat. That means you're 100 pounds of lean mass. So 0.8 would be 80 grams of protein a day. That would be your goal. You want to hit that every day, or over the course of a week, average out. Some days could be lower, some higher, and kind of average out to that 80 grams or so. In that example, for protein sparing modified fast, to help with satiety, protein's very satiating, and you're not eating a ton of calories when you're protein sparing modified fast. You're only eating, 600 calories or something. So to help with that, you maybe up the protein a bit to maybe 1 times your lean mass. So that might be like 100 grams of protein, which is still only 400 calories, right? Keep your carbs to an absolute minimum, 0 if you're do it kind of carnivore style, and just do the protein. And then fat is going to be, on the low end, to make healthy hormones and things the body needs, you want to maybe have 30 grams of protein or 30 grams of fat, somewhere around there, to make sure you're absorbing fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, creating healthy hormones, those kind of things. So maybe that's why we say, 30, 40 grams of fat minimum. Don't want to go, you want to kind of get to that as close to that minimum as you can to maximize the burning of the fat off the body. So, we say 40, 50 grams per fat. Okay.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the thermic effect of food and a lot of, and I'm going to try to simplify everything for people who are listening to the show. For example, let's say I go to the grocery store and I see a food item. Somehow magically we've made this food which has 100 grams fat, 100 grams protein, and 100 grams carbs. How does that translate into actual calories? What kind of variables or factors could play in reducing or increasing, or and we can also factor in the inaccuracy of some of the nutrition labels. So please feel free to go out on a tear. You have 20 hours.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's thermic effect of food is one effect, obviously. 25% thermic effect of food with protein versus only 3% for fat. That's a lot. If you add it up over a 2,000 calorie diet, you're talking about hundreds of calories in difference. That can make a big difference day to day, every day. Adding up over the course of a year, that's several pounds of weight loss just from the thermic effect of food, because you're leveraging more protein than you are some of the other fuel sources. So that's why we always make protein kind of the focus, right? We want to focus on protein, making sure you're getting your goal every day. Protein also is very micronutrient dense, so you're getting lots of nutrients when you get quality animal proteins. So that's where we put our focus, is on that, especially if weight loss is the goal.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it seems like the nutrition labels just are interesting cats in the whole
there's things on the labels that drive me nuts. Like maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is higher on the glycemic index than sugar. I think sugar is like 55 or something, and maltodextrin's like 80 or 90. But they don't have to include it in the carb counts. It's like, how does this make any sense? And then you got some things that get included as fiber, but that have significant effects on insulin, on blood glucose levels. Some of the Quest bars and some of the fibers they used in some of them were very insulinogenic and very caused spikes in blood glucose, even though they were listed as fiber.
And that's why I follow Alex Leaf, because he posts all of these things where he talks about different foods that are supposedly zero glycemic, but they seem to have quite a bit of an impact on the glucose and insulin levels. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole when you go to the grocery stores, and it could be a bit tough challenge. Any other things that you think have been surprising as far as food is concerned, or going to the grocery stores are concerned?
Well, we actually spend very little time in the middle of the grocery store. We shop on the outside. The outside is your animal proteins, your vegetables, your dairy, if you're not dairy sensitive. That's where we pretty much do all our shopping. But there's definitely some, there's lots of little things like that. Like in the keto community as well, there's a fair amount of people who will try to do a lot of substitutes for, gluten or breads using things like flax. And we stay away from flax because flax is very high in phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens, they mimic estrogen in the body. That's not good for men or women. Women have 3 types of estrogen. And the one that is raised by flax and soy is the bad estrogen that they don't want. And so that form can cause issues, can cause hormone imbalances and all these types of things. So we stay away from flax as well.
Okay. Sounds good. Fun question. Do calories matter?
Yes. Calories matter, but the context of the calories also matters. You can't slap 500 calories worth of sugar in front of me and 500 calories of protein and have the same effect, because the body is going to treat them differently. It's going to be a drastic difference in how the hormones deal with that. Thermic effect of food is going to be drastically different. There's all these little pieces of how that gets metabolized in the body that make it a very different scenario. I think one of the things that's the most powerful about a ketogenic lifestyle is that you're able to eat reduced calories and sustain it. If you go to some of these low-fat diets, they might be lower calorie, 1,000 calories or something, but you can't sustain it because you're starving all the time. I'm always amazed at our clients that come to us and say, I'm struggling to eat 1,000 calories, because they're full all day long. They no longer have cravings. It amazes me that they're able to do that, but their bodies have lots of extra stored body fat, so they're not starving. They're using the stored body fat as fuel. I think that's one of the misconceptions in keto is that people think that the high fat from the high fat, low carb has to all come from diet. If your body's already high fat, you can tap that for some of your fat supply. You don't need it all in the diet.
Yeah. Is it the process of tapping into fat stores which promotes satiety, or is it because the foods that are ketotic happen to be very filling and satiating? That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, and what effect they have on hormones. And one of the reasons that something, say, the sugar scenario is going to be so problematic is because that big spike in sugar into your blood glucose will result in a spike of insulin that always overcorrects because it's not used to that huge spike of glucose. It's, we aren't evolved to eat candy all day long. I remember writing the book about, I used to watch Little House on the Prairie when I was a kid. That's not all that long ago from an evolutionary perspective, right? And they got one piece of candy at Christmas time for the year. And they went to the store, the little store in their town. They'd drive in and they'd get to pick one piece of candy. That was it, for the year. And now, do kids go a day without having candy? I mean, it's the body's not used to being bombarded with glucose. And so when that insulin response happens from the huge spike in glucose, it's going to overcorrect. So what happens when it overcorrects and your blood sugar dips a little too low? You're going to get hungry because your body's saying, fuel's getting too low in the blood. Let's, that stimulates leptin and ghrelin responses and you get hungry. So that's one of the big problems with that, breakdown from that standpoint is that you get those cycles that, spiking and dropping and plummeting of blood sugar creates these cycles of no matter what you eat, every 2 hours, you're hungry again.
What really sucks is when we have kids in our culture, let's say the kid is crying, we're giving him candies, we're incentivizing a bit of a bad behavior. So I think that's also an area that we need to start exploring, like negative reinforcement of some sort. Guess what's going to happen when all your kids are being raised that way? Once they're feeling bad in life, as adults, they're going to go back to using food as a coping mechanism. It just goes and hardwires into you. So, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, we definitely try to avoid anything food related when it comes to those kind of situations, not make it about food.
What exactly is fat flux?
Fat flux, so like I mentioned earlier, you can have a wide range of fat circulating in your blood at any given moment. And what's interesting is the amount of fat in your bloodstream at any given moment is usually more than you need. And so you get this kind of cycle where triglyceride molecules, they come out of your, the whole process would be, you got an adipose site, you got triglycerides stuffed in there. Your body, you get that right point where insulin's low enough, glucagon's up, and your body says, I need more fuel. So fat comes out of the fat site, the adipose site. It's a triglyceride molecule. So the first thing it does, that's 3 free fatty acid molecules linked together with a glycerol backbone. What happens is, first thing is that glycerol is cleaved off. 3 free fatty acids go into the bloodstream. And when you're keto and you're got lots of mitochondria and you're burning a fat burning machine, you can burn that free fatty acid directly in the muscle. It's bound to albumin and goes into the bloodstream, and you can be using that right in your muscle for fuel. That's one thing that a lot of keto people don't understand is ketones aren't your primary fuel source. When you're keto, it's free fatty acid and the fat that's coming from your adipocytes. Some of that free fatty acid can go to the liver and get turned into ketones. And that primarily is for the brain and certain tissues that can't run on free fatty acid. But what's interesting too is the glycerol then goes to the liver, and 3 glycerol molecules can be combined to make a glucose molecule. So when you're burning purely stored body fat, let's say you're in a fasted state, you're getting about 90% of your energy from glucose or from fat, and about 10% from glucose, from the glycerol backbones off those triglyceride molecules, which kind of fits really well with how your body needs fuel, right? You need a little bit of glucose for certain body parts, like brain neurons, but most of the rest of the body can run off of fat.
Go ahead.
Fat flux itself, it describes that cycle, right? The taking the fat out of the fat cells, going into the bloodstream. Usually, like I said, there's usually a little more in the bloodstream than is needed at any given moment. I think because of the evolutionary fight or flight response, you want to have more around in case you suddenly have to run from a lion. So you have the energy readily available. But whatever doesn't get used goes to the liver, gets packaged up as a VLDL particle, and goes back and gets stored back in your fat cells. So that's fat flux. You got fat going in and out of your fat cells all the time. What you want to lose weight and reverse insulin resistance is you want to shrink those adipocytes. Well, how do you do that? You get in what I termed a negative fat flux, which means you have more fat coming out of the fat cells than going back in. That shrinks them, that reverses the process, that causes weight loss.
Does this process downregulate or upregulate itself when you get leaner and leaner?
What do you mean by downregulate, upregulate? You mean the amount of fat coming in and out, or?
Yeah, do you feel less energetic? Just to put it I'm a dummy, so I'm going to speak in dummy terms. So, for example, I feel weaker. Like a lot of people complain that, hey, I am very lean and I'm feeling really weak. Could this be the reason that they just, body's like, okay, I'm not going to discharge more fat. You need to be careful, dummy.
Well, very lean is a little bit relative in that respect. You know, we can store anywhere from about 1,500 to 2,000 calories of glucose in our body and glycogen in our muscles and liver. A very lean athlete, somebody with like 10% body fat, is still going to have like 20,000 calories in fat. So at 10 times as much fat stored in a very lean athlete than they have in glucose. So from that perspective, I don't think what you're describing is necessarily the case, and that they may be an electrolyte issue, you know, an electrolyte imbalance for some reason. There could be other factors, but it's probably not that, because there's a lot of, you have a lot of fat, even a lot of calories in fat, even if you're lean.
Do we know how much fat is present in the bloodstream, or is there like a overhead cap to it? Like, for example, we know that for glucose, was it like 4 grams? What about fat?
The range, this, like I said, it varies kind of wildly based on need. So if you're working out hard, if you're fat adapted, so you're keto and your body's used to burning fat as fuel, you're looking at probably free fatty acids in the bloodstream are about 1 gram on the average. They can go up quite a bit, like 10-fold or more if you're really working out. So you're talking about 1 gram of fat, or about 9 calories in your entire blood volume. Yeah. But that can go up a lot. You know, if you're maxed out at, you're talking about an athlete who's keto adapted, working out for 2 hours at a maximum rate, that's going to go up a lot, order of magnitude. But on a typical steady state, it's probably about 1 gram of fat.
Okay. Let's talk about everybody's favorite, alcohol. Well, it's not really everybody's favorite, but alcohol, how does it impact the body? There's
a lot of aspects. The most important one again, I keep going back to weight loss. I know not everybody is in keto for weight loss, but the vast majority of people are. When you look at it from a weight loss perspective, alcohol is the number one oxidative priority. So that means your body, whenever these macronutrients come in, alcohol, exogenous ketones now, protein, carbohydrates, or fat, your body is going to process them in order. So if alcohol comes in, it has to process alcohol first. And if you look at it, why is the body doing this? The most likely reason in my mind is it's in order of storage capacity. So there is no storage capacity for alcohol. You can't store alcohol. So it has to be burned or used immediately. You can't store it. And it's toxic, right? Too much alcohol in the blood and you die. So this is why the body says, I got to deal with this first. I can't store it off. Things like fat, carbohydrates, those things can be easily stored. So when excess fuel comes into the blood in fat, it says, I can store that away and deal with that later. If alcohol comes in, it can't. It's got to deal with it first. And from a weight loss perspective, what's most important about that is if you are drinking alcohol, which usually leads to having some snacks or eating, or having alcohol with your meals, while your body's dealing with the alcohol, what's it doing to all the fats and carbohydrates that came along with it? It's storing them straight into storage because it's got to deal with the alcohol first. So from a weight loss perspective, that's why alcohol can be so tough for people to lose weight when they're consuming.
And I believe the first one is alcohol, and then the second one is exogenous ketones. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, this is based on a back and forth I had with Mike Julian about where this would fit in, because there's the other oxidative priority columns in this chart in our book is from a study, really good study that looked at all these components and rated these things out. They didn't test exogenous ketones at that time because they didn't exist. So we put it in here where it most likely fits as far as a fuel source. But yeah, it's number 2 because there's also limited storage capacity, limited to none. You can kind of store some exogenous ketones as beta hydroxybutyrate in the bloodstream. That's kind of a storage state almost, but it's very limited. So again, based on what the body is looking at, if I got too much fuel coming in and I can't store it, I got to deal with it first.
Okay. And so what comes after the exogenous ketones? Let's tell everybody the priority from 1 to 5 or 6.
Next is protein. Protein's the next oxidative priority. There is somewhat of a storage capacity for it, but mainly with protein, body doesn't want to use protein as energy. It takes a lot of ATP cycles to get protein turned into a fuel like glucose. So the body doesn't want to do that if it doesn't have to. And so if there's other fuels around, so if you've got some fat or carbohydrate around, it doesn't want to use protein as fuel. It wants to break it down to amino acids and use it for muscle protein synthesis, put it through the mTOR pathway, do muscle generation. So maintaining and building lean mass, right? That's where your protein is going to go unless you have very excessive amounts of protein. Then you might have some spillover and it might start turning some of that into glucose and upping the glucose in the bloodstream. The next one is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, the 4th oxidative priority. We, of course, have a bigger storage capacity for carbohydrates. Like I said, like anywhere from probably 1,200 to 2,000 calories. And so that is the next one. And the next oxidative priority is fat. Fat, theoretically, there's people that have hundreds of thousands of calories worth of fat stored in their body. So theoretically, it's almost unlimited as far as storage capacity. So you can see how this kind of lays out in the body in that it's got to deal with the things it can't store first, and then it can get around to dealing with this easily stored macronutrients like fat later on. Okay.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit with the role of insulin. And I think you mentioned that this hormone it basically has a lot of functions. It influences so many different processes. And I think you mentioned in your book is that osteoporosis is one of them, and sodium retention is one of them. So what does this thing do?
Well, there's a lot of effects there on the body that, first of all, every macronutrient that comes into the body, carbohydrate, fat, or protein, are going to increase insulin. And that, again, is something that's not, people don't think fat increases insulin, but it does. it's much less than carbohydrates, but it's definitely enough of an increase that it's going to shut off the fat flux, shut off the lipolysis happening, which means it'll stop pulling fat out of your fat stores to be used as fuel and turn to deal with the carbohydrates or the fat coming into the diet. And that's why, we look at this a little differently than some of the keto groups, that it's not all about adding fat. If you want to burn the fat off your body, you need to modulate the fat down a bit so that you use more off the body than you use out of your diet. When you're keto adapted, you can use dietary fat and body fat equally. It can tap either one with ease. And so you want it using more of that body fat as fuel. But as far as insulin goes, there's a whole series of, it's kind of like, you think of it from the adipose side as kind of like a net, where when insulin comes up, it says, okay, hold on, fat cell, don't put out any more fat. It kind of like a net over it to stop it from putting fat out. And then, of course, also allowing fat in if it needs to add to the fat stores. But it also has a lot of other effects on the body. There's a huge relationship between, of course, insulin and glucagon. Glucagon and insulin are these counter-regulatory things, right? One, glucagon goes up, you're in a catabolic state where you're putting glucose into the bloodstream, you're putting fat into the bloodstream, and you're utilizing fuel. When insulin goes up, glucagon goes down, and so you get this kind of opposite effect. There's a presentation from Low Carb Breckenridge by Dr. Bickman that actually just talked about that relationship, that I really encourage you maybe put a link in the show notes. It's a really great showing the relationship of glucagon and insulin and the different macronutrients. It's really a great presentation.
Okay. So, yeah, Dr. Bickman was on board. He was like a machine gun, like firing all over the podcast. That's what I felt like. It's a really cool guy.
He's great. He's a good speaker too.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways, what's the best way to raise insulin, and what's the best way to lower it?
Well, the best way to raise it is carbohydrates. You get the highest raise in insulin from carbohydrate intake. The best way to lower it is just not have fuel coming into your diet. And that's any fuel. So you're going to lower insulin. We talk about this. We have a couple charts in here comparing a sort of standard American diet where you're eating every couple hours and the effects on insulin versus maybe a keto adapted diet where you're eating an intermittent fasting window. So you're compressing the time that you're consuming calories. We typically have clients, they usually eat 2 meals in a maybe 6-hour window. So they eat all their food within 6 hours. That gives the body time to have lower insulin, right? Because every time food comes in, insulin gets raised. So if you're eating every 2 hours, you're constantly raising insulin. If you compress that to a smaller window, now you give your body more time to utilize stored body fat for fuel, which can help with weight loss.
Okay, awesome. When do you guys employ fasting? Do you guys have a protocol, or is that right off the bat you tell people, go fast?
Well, intermittent fasting, you're still eating a set number of calories per day. You're just compressing the time that you consume them to, 6 hours instead of spreading it out over a course of a day. That most people can do within the first, few days or weeks of going keto. It kind of comes naturally to most clients. They'll just not be hungry all day long, so that it just easily fits with their lifestyle once they go keto to compress and just eat 2 meals. But longer fasts are different. If weight loss is the primary goal, we will have clients do a protein sparing modified fast before doing a water fast. When I say water fast, I'm talking no calories for greater than 24 hours. There's definitely applications for longer fasts. They can be good for insulin sensitivity. They can be good for increasing apoptosis and autophagy and that kind of cellular rebuilding that can happen. I've seen people who have followed a therapeutic fasting protocol and really reversed some diseases that had a cellular turnover that the longer fasting enabled through the apoptosis and autophagy. But if you do a longer fast, the most critical thing is that you then eat properly after. The last thing you want to do is go straight back into a super calorie restricted situation because you've lost lean mass, right? If you water only fast, you're going to lose about 1/3 of a pound of muscle or of lean mass every day. You got to rebuild that. So you need lots of good proteins when you refeed at the end of the fast.
Okay. Sounds good. Fasting seems to be quite a bit of a buzz in the keto sphere, and a bit controversial at times. This is the part where I would have delved into hormones, but that's going to be, I think, a whole new podcast.
Yeah, that's a deep one, and my wife actually wrote that chapter, so maybe we'll have to have her on and discuss that.
That sounds like a great idea. I'm always looking for good people to bring onto the show. Let's delve into something a little bit more simpler, which is electrolytes and their function, sodium, potassium, magnesium, or is there anything else besides that you'd like to talk about besides these top 3 musketeers?
Those are definitely the top ones, and the reason that they're so much more important with a keto diet is that, number one, when you remove the carbohydrates from your diet, your body releases a lot of the water that it retains. And with that water is going to go electrolytes. And so that's why when you go keto, especially in the beginning, it's important to keep your electrolytes up because you need to replenish them because your body's letting go of this retained water, and keep your water up in your diet as well. But staying hydrated, that's one of the keys to staving off that keto flu, or those early stages where don't have as much energy. Being hydrated and keeping your electrolytes up is definitely beneficial for that. But also, if you look at what you're coming from, if you do a well-formulated ketogenic diet, like we tend to preach, which is a whole food-based diet, whole foods don't have sodium unless you're eating a lot of blood, which maybe if you're a Maasai tribe in Africa, you might be getting enough sodium. But otherwise, you have to add sodium because whole foods don't have sodium. Processed foods have tons of sodium. Milkshake at McDonald's has more sodium than the small French fry does. So you're getting all this sodium in your diet that you may not even know about. When you switch to whole foods, there's no sodium coming, so you got to add it. So we make sure clients get about 2 teaspoons of sea salt per day to keep their electrolytes up.
Okay. Yeah, these 3 seem to be quite a bit of an issue, it seems. Go ahead. Magnesium
is another big one because we just don't get as much in our food supply these days as we used to. We used to get a fair amount from our water supplies, from natural springs and things. But today, who drinks that? Everything's bottled water, filtered city water. All the nutrients are leached out of it, and there's no, trace minerals left because they also cause problems with your pipes. They build up in your pipes, and so we get water softeners to filter out these minerals. So I think it's like 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. So that's no matter what your lifestyle is. So adding magnesium is typically helpful for most people as well.
Okay, and potassium, have we covered that?
Potassium is a little bit different one in that if you're focusing on the proteins are pretty high in potassium. You're going to get quite a bit of potassium just coming from your food supply if you're eating right, incorporating things like avocados or spinach or these type of things. You're going to get quite a bit of potassium. So it depends a little bit on your diet. if you're going to need to supplement. And it's also a little bit of a tricky topic because people get a little weird about supplementing potassium because too much potassium can cause heart murmurs and issues as well. So there's a little balance there. I don't supplement with it. It can be helpful to some people, especially in the first 4 to 6 weeks when they're leaching out a lot of electrolytes to supplement some of the potassium back in. But I personally don't supplement with potassium, just sodium and some magnesium.
Okay. And what are symptoms of deficiency in either of these electrolytes?
Typically, you're going to see things like headaches, heavy legs, your legs feel heavy or cramping. You can also see, if you're not getting enough electrolytes, you can see heart flutter, that kind of flutter of your heart in your chest, when a weird feeling. I've felt it before, but that's typically you need some electrolytes, typically potassium.
Okay. Sounds good. What's your favorite chapter in the book, by the way?
One of the favorites, I really enjoyed the kind of how the body works, but one of my favorites is probably the nutrient density section, because I think it's both aspects of that chapter, both the aspect of what is a nutrient dense food versus, the part where I discuss plants and their role as far as, anti-nutrients and how the body processes them. I think that's a very misunderstood aspect of our food supply, of where those things come from.
Okay. Let's talk about anti-nutrients. What are they, and what does it even mean by anti-nutrients?
So an anti-nutrient is something that is kind of the opposite of a nutrient, right? A nutrient is something that nourishes the body. This is something that could harm the body, right? And with plants, there's a lot of anti-nutrients that come along. And this is something that people don't discuss. There's been a couple books that have, I think, the Plant Paradox, he talks about it in that book, about how the plants that we're eating can potentially harm you with the anti-nutrient. If you look at it from a evolutionary perspective, these plants, they want you to eat the fruit, because when you eat the fruit, you spread the seeds that are in the fruit. They don't want you to eat the leaves and the stalk, because that kills the plant. So they put in they have natural protection on those to protect them. Cooking them and things can definitely reduce those amounts that get into the body, but they have those anti-nutrients on them.
Okay. So, do they have any long-term studies, if at all, about the negative effects of anti-nutrients? And interestingly, is there an example of an anti-nutrient?
Well, the most common one is nightshades, right? Nightshades contain a bitter compound, glycoalkaloids, they're called. That's what causes certain people more sensitive to the glycoalkaloids. So that's why some people have a sensitivity to nightshades, because nightshades, like potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, those things have this compound that's an anti-nutrient that can cause irritation in the body.
Okay. So, is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we start wrapping things up? Because we've covered some really good ground, I think.
Yeah, I think the other thing was in that nutrient density chapter is to focus on, again, proteins.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at, one of the things I like to say is if I put a steak on a plate and then some broccoli and some blueberries, and I put that in front of somebody and said, point to the food that's got the highest nutrient density, micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. Where are you going to get them from? They're not going to point to the steak. They're going to point to the kale or the blueberries, right? Because that's what is preached to us in society today, is that your fruits and vegetables are where all the nutrients are. But it's gotten lost somehow that animal proteins have a lot of nutrients, especially if you start looking at organ meats. Beef by itself, across a wide range of nutrients, stacks up really well against most of these, common quote superfoods like kale and blueberries and broccoli. They'll be the vegetables will be a little higher in certain areas, like one nutrient it might be higher, but across the board, there's a wider range of nutrients at a higher level coming from beef. And then if you go to something like beef liver, it's off the charts. Like it dominates almost every vitamin and mineral category. It is really the true superfood. And so that's why we try to incorporate some organ meats into our recipes and with clients, because some people are reluctant at first, but you can take beef liver. One of the things we like to do is you take our chili recipe. So you got a nice spicy chili, and instead of 2 pounds of hamburger, do 1.5 pounds of hamburger and 1/2 pound of ground beef liver. You mix that all together, cook it up. You don't even know what's in there, but you've just amped up your vitamins and minerals in that dish.
Or be like my mother who forced it down my throat when I was young, so that works.
Liver and onions.
Man, those were the days. And over there, we had this holiday called Eid, and on that holiday, you'd slaughter a bunch of animals. And the first thing that we used to cook was liver before every other every other piece that came from the meat. So that's a really fascinating thing.
Well, it's kind of interesting too. In the animal kingdom, there's a preference for organ meats as well. Like grizzly bears up in Alaska, when the salmon are plentiful, they only eat the brains and maybe the guts, and they leave the rest. There was a story recently that these sharks were showing up on the shores, dead, with only their livers torn out of them. Here, the orcas, killer whales, were attacking them and only eating their liver. So again, when the food supply is plentiful, they go for the organ meats first. That's where the nutrient density is, and that's where that's by instinct, that's what they're going for first.
And that's really fascinating because they didn't have nutrition books telling them what to do. So
yeah, it's instinct.
Yep. And so let's talk a little bit, I don't know if you've covered grounds on this, but the bioavailability of vegetables in comparison to animals in general. I think, what is it, like 96% or so on animal meats?
Yeah, that's a interesting aspect of this, plants versus animals situation as well. And we're not, I think a carnivore diet can be done properly. As long as you eat nose to tail and get, the organ meats and the liver and everything with it, you're going to get enough nutrients. I think we typically are a little bit more moderate on that, in that focus on the protein. But of course, you're going to have other vegetables on the plate, low carb vegetables for color, for texture, for flavor, all that kind of stuff. But your focus is going to be the protein. That's what we typically say. But as far as the plants, I just lost your. What was the question again?
Bioavailability of plants.
Bioavailability. So one thing that's really interesting is if you look at just protein. People say I get enough protein eating vegetables, whether it's the protein from grains or soy, which again we don't recommend. But the problem is it's not a complete protein, and I've seen studies where if you look at how much protein is needed to stimulate mTOR. mTOR is the pathway where you build muscle, build lean mass. It takes like 20 grams of something like whey protein. You never stimulate it with protein from grains. So the grains don't have a complete amino acid to stimulate it. And that's why maintaining lean mass can be such a challenge for a vegetarian if they're not eating eggs, especially. So, bioavailability from a macronutrient level is important as well.
What about the micros? How's that absorption? Has there been research done on that?
There has been some. one of the most interesting aspects of it, I find, is some things are dependent on your macronutrient breakdown. In other words, the less carbohydrates you have in your diet, the less vitamin C you need in your diet. They're directly related. And that's why somebody can get away with a carnivore type diet and have a lot less vitamin C than they typically would. Because if they're doing carnivore, they're doing almost no carbohydrates. So there's a relationship there between them.
Yeah. Well, times are changing, my friend. We are on a very strange cusp where the last 50, 60 years have been practically feels like a self-genocide in human history, where we created foods and products and a lot of bad information that didn't turn out good in practicality. And now we have people like yourself that are leading the charge and helping the world become a better place. So just to go back to your message, which is your book, what can people expect when they purchase it, buy it, or open it up?
Well, I think what I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really tried hard to do in this book was to give the relevant science and information, but to give it in a way that's easy to understand. I think people who are more science-based can get something out of this, but also people that aren't really into science and just want to hear it in more layman's terms can get something out of it as well. So we really try to put everything you need for succeeding at this, not only as a diet, but a lifestyle, and including your family in this lifestyle and our kids and the benefits they can see, but making it really easy to understand as well.
All right, fantastic. Are there any paradoxes that you've observed throughout your entire journey as far as low carb or keto? What were some of the aha moments that you had?
There's been a lot of them. The adipose-centric model is a really interesting one to me because if you think of it, it's such a paradox from an evolutionary perspective. Because today, if you have somebody who can eat whatever they want and not gain body fat, not really gain a lot of weight, you say, boy, they're lucky, right? Look at them. They can eat whatever they want and they stay, quote, healthy, even though, as we've discussed, they could have diabetes, even though they don't gain a lot of weight. And then the person who gains body fat easily, you feel sorry for them because they gain body fat so easily. But if you go back a few thousand years, those roles are completely flipped. That person that cannot store body fat is going to really struggle through the winter, and they may die off because they just can't store enough fuel for the future. Or the one that can easily store body fat is super advantageous because they can store a bunch in the summer and then use it up in the winter. So it's really kind of a paradox in that way.
Yeah, Corey and I, who works with the production, we talk about all this time. Like we find it a little difficult compared to some other people to gain weight, and then we tell, okay, these people who are overweight are darn lucky because they can survive a post-apocalyptic scenario, which could happen anytime. So exactly. We would be the first ones to be dead.
Yep, a post-apocalypse would definitely flip the scales on that again.
Is there some sort of a relationship here there where cultures which were exposed more to predation and animals or hunter-gatherer for an extended period of time, they have less propensity to store fat than compared to, let's say, some of the winter cultures or colder climates where you were forced to create this system of fat storage where you've become an energy container practically? Hate to say that, but is there something to that?
I'm not sure, but I would be willing to bet that there was a evolutionary component in that the people that couldn't do it didn't last very long in those, colder environments. So the people that couldn't store up fat didn't last through the winter, So I think there was probably a natural selection happening there.
Yeah, maybe in the equator areas where people who've been there for generations
could last. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've nailed down so many good topics. You're a smart guy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Any last few things that you'd like to discuss or hammer down?
I think we covered a pretty good gamut.
Yeah, let's talk hormones. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Hormones, exercise. We've covered quite a bit, I think, and I appreciate you having me on and taking the time.
It was a pleasure. So how can people find you? And here's a good question. Yep. When should people find you?
We're out there all the time. Our book, of course, we have a blog with tons of free information and recipes. That's mariamindbodyhealth.com. And then we have a support site where we support people through this lifestyle, and that's called keto-adapted.com, where we're going to very soon have some courses that are going to be available as well.
Can we spell out the first website in case people are listening to this?
Yep. MariaMindbodyHealth. mariamindbodyhealth.com.
Okay. Anywhere else that you want? Any other plugs that you got?
Oh, you can look up Maria or Craig Emmerich on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and you'll find us there.
All right, fantastic, Craig. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to meeting you at any of these low-carb keto conferences. And thanks for adding a pool of knowledge into the world. I have definitely enjoyed the book. It's really good, so I would recommend that to people who are listening to the show. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at ketogeek.com to check out our premium keto-friendly and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to ketogeek.com/signup to join the low-carb playground.